Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 78th Annual Conference on World Affairs. How many sessions have you been in? This is not your first session, I trust. 6 sessions. Do we have any more than that? That's impressive. Well, thank you again for being here. My name is Dennis Paul. I'm with Elevations Credit Union. I've been in the financial services sector for over 30 years, and what we see today in 2026 is literally a whole new world, and it's not necessarily optimal for our young people. So this session is primarily designed around talking about the headwinds and the environment that young people face in terms of the financial services industry and things of that nature. Let me start by reading CU Boulder's land acknowledgement. The University of Colorado Boulder our flagship university honors and recognizes the many contributions of indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territorial and ancestral lands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute tribes, as well as many other Native American tribes. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty, as well as their work. Educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating indigenous knowledge. Consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support, and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. We do ask that our attendees remain respectful throughout the discussion and refrain from interruptions. Signs, banners, noisemakers, and other audible disruptions are not permitted and will result in the responsible parties being asked to leave the room. So stay mellow out there, all right? We don't want to get too rowdy. We'll have the opportunity for questions. We have our producers in the audience, and if you have a question at any point during the panel discussion, raise your hand and we'll make sure you get that. Would it surprise anybody if I told you that 7 out of 10 undergraduates have significantly damaged their credit by the time they graduate? That's probably not a shock to anybody in this room. 8 out of 10 students leave university not because of personal or academic matters, but because of financial matters. So we are at an inflection point with young people today in terms of how they manage or mismanage their financial situations. We have an incredible panel today that'll unpack some of this. We're so gracious that our panelists are here today. We'll start with brief introductions. And Diane, you can start us. And hit your mic button.
There you go. Okay. I'm Diane Hirschhorn. I spent most of my career working in high net worth wealth management. And more recently, a few years ago, I decided to teach at CU. I had this epiphany that really what I was doing for high net worth wealth management was making rich people richer, and that didn't quite have the ring that I'd hoped it would have. And now I devote my time to my students at CU trying to teach financial literacy.
Love it. Thank you, Diane. Diana?
Hi, everyone. Good to see everybody here. I'm Diana Moss. I am a Vice President and Director of Competition Policy at the Progressive Policy Institute in Washington, D.C. We're a center-left think tank with a mission to fashion pragmatic, sensible solutions to support working-class families in the United States. I do a lot of work on antitrust and regulation, including in financial markets, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Diana. Carl?
And I'm Carl Quintanilla. I'm an anchor on CNBC. I host a daily show called Squawk on the Street from the New York Stock Exchange, where we cover markets and stocks. Before that, I've been with CNBC and NBC News for about 25 years. Prior to that, I was a reporter for the Wall Street Journal for 6 years, and that was my first job out of college after graduating from the University of Colorado at Boulder.
Awesome. We got a Buffalo. So all three of these individuals are incredibly well equipped to look at the marketplace and look at what's happening with our Gen Z folks. And so I would take about 5 minutes each, 3 to 5 minutes. Carl, we'll start with you and tell us a little bit about your perspective on this matter.
I'm coming from a framework of risk assets, the stocks as an asset, bonds, crypto, digital assets, anything involving risk taking. Which we cover, on a very high frequency basis every day with every tick. The stock market, which today hit a new closing high, despite all the crazy things that are going on in the world militarily and economically. I think how the young generation thinks about risk and wealth building is affecting markets dramatically. And it's funny, I was thinking about, Wall Street has these acronyms which they use if you're ever active on financial Reddit or on social media, the way they talk about risk. One is YOLO, which of course stands for you only live once. The other is FOMO, which is of course fear of missing out. And the third is HODL, HODL, which in general stands for hold on for dear life, to an asset that's undergoing extreme volatility. And all three of these notions are kind of like about throwing caution to the wind. This generation of investors that are coming into working life and certainly personal household budget, household balance sheet management have grown up in a post 9/11 world. They've grown up witnessing multiple global crises, the housing crisis here and the subsequent bailouts, the COVID crisis and that subsequent bailout. They're getting married at declining rates later in life. They're having children in declining rates. And their dreams, I think, of owning a home have taken a hit with mortgage rates that are stubbornly high. So the notion of building wealth for something down the road is farther and farther in the back of their mind. And increasingly, it's about today having extreme risk tolerance, and it's having dramatic implications for the valuation of risk assets everywhere.
It's interesting to hear you talk about that. Really a paradigm shift in the way young people are thinking, and it really kind of one aspect of wealth is kind of replaced by another. And so the YOLO and the FOMO and things like that, that's an interesting driver when you think about financial management. Diana, tell us a little bit about your wheelhouse.
Absolutely. So I think one way to think about what's going on with this sort of financial risk-taking epidemic in our younger people is to tee up sort of the three major forces or pressures that they face that I never faced, right? I grew up I'm a boomer too, technically. I grew up in the 70s. The cost of living was low in the 70s and the 80s, right? The cost of living now is sky high, and you see it all over the news. It's an enormous factor in how people are voting in midterm elections, in presidential cycles, and it is not coming down, right? The cost of owning a home is out of reach for most everybody at this point, not just the Gen Zers, the millennials, even some Gen Xers. Number two, I never faced a lot of credit card debt. I mean, we didn't have credit cards until we were well into our 20s. There's a lot of credit card debt now, and it's at very, very high interest rates. And then student loans, right? We had student loans, but they were very manageable, and they were at 1% interest rates. Now we see incredible amounts of debt stacking up for students to go to college. We're actually seeing a lot of shifts in higher education and where kids are going, what kind of pathways they choose after high school. A lot of trade schools are amping up. There are programs, but the four-year program the college program is not necessarily the program of choice anymore. Anyway, these three big factors have really, really put a lot of pressure on young people. And if you couple that with social media pressures and what they see and what they want, but what they may not be able to have or afford, with all of this bombardment from online, not helped by artificial intelligence, you can see how they might be becoming, freaked out about their ability to succeed financially. So they may be turning, and this is sort of the phase shift that we're talking about here, turning to sort of other tools or mechanisms for being financially successful. So prediction markets, for example, right? The percentage of young men gambling away in prediction markets is huge. Buy now, pay later, right? We now see a lot of debt stacking up for folks doing buy now, pay later. So you can see how these pressures might be translating into very risky markets, which are taking an additional toll on them and their credit ratings. But I would note, and I'll leave you on this note, these markets aren't regulated. They are an unregulated free-for-all, for the most part, at this point in time.
Yeah, Diana, that's interesting to think about. So these pressures and factors have really created a trap for these folks, and I assume once you're in that cycle, it's very hard to get out. And without any regulatory support or kind of oversight, it's probably very easy to fall into that. Well, Diane, let's talk a little bit about what you see in the classroom. Diane has a very unique viewpoint on this panel in that she interfaces with our undergraduates every day. So you have a ringside seat for this.
Some of whom are here today, and thank you guys. So I come at this from perspective not only as an educator, but a parent. And so when my kids were first really young, my husband and I were very focused on how do we educate them, treat them well, and help them understand how to be good people, and also how do we help them create on their own financial independence. And, I was that mom who sent my kids to bank camp. Yep, I admit it. And even last night, my 23-year-old called me, and we were on a fire drill because she didn't know how to pay her taxes online. And so I decided to devote the second half of my career to helping students understand these issues. And at the beginning of my career, I would say 10 years ago, when I started to teach at CU as an adjunct, the questions my worries were really, do these students have financial education? Will they have the discipline to save enough and to ultimately want to invest so they can be financially independent? And now it's 10 years later, and I would say my concerns are more like, what are the other influences on my students? They're actually following advice on TikTok. They follow recommendations for people who produce content that sounds interesting and exciting, but it's really not based on accuracy. They fall subject to the fear of missing out. We had that when I was growing up, but now their social media is intoxicating for them, and the amount of time they spend on it. I've stopped allowing them to bring cell phones into my class. They're not allowed to use computers anymore because they're big distractions. And what's happened with these prediction markets, sports betting, they now are confusing or blurring the lines between what is an investment and what is entertainment, really, or gambling. And so they think that they're doing really good things and maybe going to make money, and the odds are really not stacked in their favor. Yeah, that's mostly what worries me these days. The buy now, pay later is just intoxicating for them. It's turned what they think is a saving strategy into increasing their debt. And they're increasingly worried now about getting jobs after they graduate because with the advent of AI, many of them have a lot of student debt, and now they're turning to the latest and greatest trick to maybe get a big payoff, but most likely not, because they no longer believe in the same path that I can get a great job after I graduate, I'll be able to pay off my debt, and they're no longer attracted to solid investing strategies that aren't exciting, but they have a much better track record of working.
Thank you, Diane. Yeah, it's interesting to think about the opportunity cost of some of these behaviors, and really inhibits the a longer term thought process. I will share with you that we were talking with the chancellors, some of the senior VCs, and online gambling is epidemic level at a young age. You know, I had this perception that it was some guy in his basement with a Coors Light, some old guy in an easy chair, but boy, that's not the case. Our undergraduates are really have been taken into this, and of course, as we all know, it's one of the largest mechanisms for wealth transfer in the U.S. today. Some great questions are coming in. Thank you so much for that. So this might be for Diane, but we'll open it up to everybody. How does buy now, pay later and other forms of debt differ from credit card debt and other debt in terms of regulation and consequences? So we did talk about that just a little bit. Credit markets tend to be pretty regulated, but boy, some of this other stuff simply isn't regulated. So
it's really not regulated, and it's not consolidated in one place. So I can buy now, pay later in multiple different sites, multiple different companies. That information is collected by some of the credit reporting agencies, but not all. And so it's very easy when you purchase something on a credit card. You know you're buying, let's say, a $300 object. You know that you're paying interest. And then each month, you either have to make your minimum payment or your total debt is going to increase over time. And so it hurts people, consumers, more. It feels more painful for that kind of purchase than buy now, pay later. What my students are doing now is saying, oh, well, it's 4 payments. And I'm budgeting because I can afford this first monthly payment. But the access to all these buy now, pay laters, it's almost tricking consumers into spending more and building up more debt when they already have a lot of student debt.
You know, Diane, it occurs to me that, you know, from an antitrust perspective, and maybe this is getting a little too granular, but what does disclosure look like in a buy now, pay later environment? Because when you think about kind of a traditional installment loan or a revolving line of credit, disclosure is very specific. So I'm just curious.
That was Diana, not Diane, for me.
I'm sorry.
Okay,
Yeah.
no, that's okay. We have a Diana and a Diane.
Oh, man, don't mess up my name.
That's a really, really good question. So we typically unpack these kinds of issues into 2 buckets. One is the standard consumer protection bucket, right, which involves regulations that are designed to prevent deceptive practices, to make sure that consumers have good information, lots of transparency about the choices they make and what they're getting into. And then the other bucket is competition. That's what Dennis was referring to when he said antitrust. That's competition enforcement. Are the markets competitive? Do we have lots of good head-to-head, hard-nosed rivalry between companies offering these buy now, pay later services and credit card services? Do we have robust competition so that that competition drives down interest rates, right? Really spurs high quality, good service, lots of innovation in the financial system. So, you know, we're sort of parallel pathing these 2 policy levers or tools. And, you know, unfortunately, I can't report to you that we're having smashing success on either front, right? Consumer protections tend to lag the actual harms that we're seeing in the marketplace. It can take years to build up kind of a political head of steam to get Congress interested in passing legislation and sector regulators to issue, rulemakings, for example, to take on new developments in markets. So that needs work. And then certainly on the competition side, there isn't any shortage of market power in our financial system, right? We have powerful banks. We have powerful institutional investors. I'm not saying we're looking at a monopoly here, but as an antitrust person, we watch these markets very, very carefully. And, this is really in Carl's wheelhouse because it all comes out in the wash with valuations and how markets are functioning and what people are buying or not buying. So I do think to address the issues we're talking about here, which is, our younger folks falling into these financial traps, we have to kind of get to the root of the problem, which is we do not have a handle on what's going on in these markets right now. And so even more reason to have the kind of education that Diana's providing and the kind of insights that you're providing. And certainly, Dennis, your feet on the ground, right? You see it every day in and day out.
Well, thank you so much. That's great. An interesting question here, completely appropriate. How would you attempt to reduce the wealth gap, especially if young people are avoiding risk? I think that's how that reads. So the behaviors we see, how are those behaviors adding to the wealth gap? I guess it's just a question. Carl, I'd like to hear your opinion on that.
Well, you definitely want more retail participation in the stock market is a good example. I think it was some Fed data from a few days ago that the top 1% of wealth in the country owns 90% of stocks, which is, it doesn't seem like a real number, but it is. I do think, these Trump accounts, they're called, right, is probably, I would argue, one of the most optimistic scenarios we've seen drawn on the street lately. The idea that you would get very young Americans, literally from birth, with a nut to participate in stocks for decades. It could be hugely constructive, and it's benefited from donations from some very wealthy people like Michael Dell. I think to Diana's point about regulation, I mean, we're actually moving away from regulation. The Consumer Financial Protection Board's essentially been defanged completely. Although I would argue that the street is a little bit suspicious of all of this. One big buy now, pay later company is called Affirm, which the CEO comes on our show quite often. That was a $100 stock last year. I think it's probably $40 to $50 now. It's been cut in half. They argue that their risk models are AI driven. They don't need an army of risk analysts to determine who's going to fail to meet their payments or not. But the street may have some questions about that given the retrenchment and that valuation.
Carl, you have a ringside seat of the markets. Give us some hope. Do we see young folks doing some investing? Is it as prominent as it once was, or what's investing look like for our Gen Z, our young folks?
I mean, they're definitely active. They're active, and as we said earlier, they have a ton of risk tolerance. We were joking yesterday about the market's seeming inability to fall. And I made the joke that it's like trying to keep a beach ball underwater because there is this layer of liquidity sloshing around. A lot of it is what we call retail, meaning mom and pop, regular people in and out of the markets, ready to buy. I mean, we only fell 10% on the biggest energy supply crunch ever. The stock market fell 10%, and we're back to flat since the Iranian hostilities began. So that really speaks to this notion of a generation that's like willing to kind of gamble. There's a great story today, not a great story. There's a company called Allbirds, which was a troubled shoe company, which pivoted to AI infrastructure. I'm not sure how a shoe company becomes an AI, but they obviously saw the writing on the wall. They made this announcement. The stock was up I think 500% today. And that was, no one out there is doing balance sheet analysis or terminal value analysis on this company. That is a gambling wave, a little mini gambling wave that we saw in a public equity today. And I think it just reflects people's, this melding of gambling and investing. It's happening in real time.
Yeah, that's fascinating to hear. Let's go back to our audience. Diana, this might be one for you. You touched on it a bit. Who has the influence to change these rules? What would be the reaction of the market? Should we be able to kind of put some guardrails on some of this behavior?
Yeah, good question. Again, a little context, maybe some helpful history. The stance on regulation, right, government intervention in markets, anywhere from sort of light-handed guardrail regulation to heavy-handed, say, economic regulation, price caps, the government determining who can get into the market, how much profit you can make. There's this whole spectrum of regulation. This has been a very, very political issue in the United States since the get-go. Why? Because we have a market-based economy. Markets work well if they're competitive, but we need some refs on the field, right? We need antitrust enforcers to call balls and strikes on what's pro-competitive versus anti-competitive behavior. We have to police consolidation, make sure it's not going to harm consumers through higher prices or less innovation. Anyway, so we've seen big swings in the stance on regulation over time. And when Biden was in office, for example, he put out a big executive order on competition, and sector regulators like this CFTC and the SEC were going to work together with the Justice Department and the FTC to really bootstrap each other and come up with really good regulation and get rid of bad regulation. When Trump came in, first time and second time, the deal was to remove regulation, to take off a lot of the guardrails. Under the theory that it stifles growth and innovation. So, I'm talking, just night and day in an 8-year period. So right now we are sort of grappling with that phenomenon, but we are also, we look to our members of Congress who listen to their constituents, who are issue spotting and seeing harms to our young people and other segments, and they're the ones who are going to cobble together proposed bills that ultimately work their way through the legislative process. And there are, just a ray of hope, there are people in Congress like that. There really are, actually on both sides of the aisle. And we want those people to work together more to address the kinds of issues we're talking here.
Love it. Thank you. Yeah, I think about Representative Pedersen. She's part of a financial literacy coalition caucus in Washington.
Yep.
So, speaking of which, Diane, so my company spends a lot of time on financial literacy, on financial wellness. Sometimes we have standing room only, other times we don't. Tell us how the students receive it, or are they receptive to financial literacy programming?
Let's talk about enrollment in my class. 5 years ago, there might have been 30 students, and now I have 2 classrooms full of students. I wish CU would allow me to teach or require that every student at CU, certainly if you have student debt, you should be required to take a class in personal finance. We do such a great job educating them and helping prepare them for careers, and they don't know the first thing about what to do once they graduate. So I think students who really are interested, I'd like to add to Carl's comment that really almost all my students are investing and or, taking bets, sports betting and so forth. It's rampant now. That's a big change from 10 years ago. So I do think they're interested in the subject, and I wish we would require it at CU of all students.
Diane, I wanted to follow up. We just got a question that's right on point with this. What do your students who do who are good at personal finance? What are some of their behaviors?
So I'm going to recommend several books. First of all, read. Tell your kids to read. Because the concepts I teach are pretty easy. And so first book is A Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins. And he has 3 principles that I teach my students. Spend less than you earn. Invest the difference. Avoid debt. If you do those 3 things and you start early, you're going to set yourself on the path to financial independence very fast. Because my students have a big advantage over my age group because I'm old. So if you start at my age, or my friends who ask me now, compounding is not working as much in their favor. 20-year-olds, all of them can be financially independent if they just follow these rules and save 20% or more of their income and invest it. 2 other books that I want to recommend, that you recommend to your children. How a Second Grader Beats Wall Street. Alan Roth is the author. He went to CU. It's not how I met him. But it's just a really fantastic, very simple approach to investing. And the last one is a little book to Common Sense Investing, or something like that. It's by John Bogle, who's the founder of Vanguard. It's about 150 pages, and it's just fantastic. That would be my advice, or what I'm teaching them.
That is great. Thank you for that, Diane. The flip side of that question that somebody asked is, what's the number one mistake in finances that young people make? So
Yeah, I want to say they get overwhelmed. There's the paradox of choice, where they feel they're so afraid of making a mistake, yet they'll do all these purchases or other things. And so they say, well, I can't invest in my 401k yet because I don't really know what's the best investment. Do something. If you educate yourself and follow principles, they're very simple. Invest in index funds. Invest in ETFs that are simple, that aren't leveraged. These, and maybe target date funds that are very cheap. All of those instruments will help people compound and build their wealth over time. It's a big mistake to follow the advice of some person on TikTok or your friend who invested in crypto. People tend to tell you only about their few successes. Somehow they forget to tell you about all the investments that don't work well.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much for that. I want to shift gears completely here. This is a real thoughtful question. What are the implications for philanthropy in the future for Gen Z and beyond? Is the idea of philanthropy, love of other humans, outdated? So I think the essence of the question, and this is a real sweet question. If we can't manage our personal finances, or we face headwinds, or we face challenges through social media, where does that leave our ability to, so we teach something along the theme of spend, save, and share. I'd be curious your opinion on that. That's a real thoughtful question. Thank you for that. Carl, you can kick us off if you have some
I'm just
thoughts.
thinking of a saying that Denzel Washington, the actor, once gave to an interviewer. He said, your career is divided into 3 parts. The first part you earn, the first part you learn, the second part you earn, and the third part you return. So the hope is, in a world of extreme wealth inequality, the hope is that you're going to lean on the wealthy to give back. I live in New York City, where there's a group called the Robin Hood Foundation, founded by a very famous trader, Paul Tudor Jones, founded this group where every year he hosts this huge gala, and all the rich guys from Wall Street come in, and Elton John plays and Sting plays, and they raise a ton of money to give back to the poorest people in New York City. And it is sort of Robin Hood in action. It's an amazing thing. But not everybody's going to have that sensibility and that worldview. I would add, I loved your points, and I think the thing we're fighting against is the social media, the sort of jealousy economy, the thing that you open Instagram and you see what your friends are doing and you're like, why can't I also have that? I'm going to spend on that even if I have to go into debt. And the other is the government. And I don't just mean our government, I mean most governments are not good examples of balance sheet management. They run huge deficits. Our own debt to GDP is ridiculous, and our budget deficit's probably going to go to 7 rather than coming down to 3, which was the hope prior to the war. Just bad examples of how to run a household budget. It's not like they're learning this from people other than yourself.
Diana?
Sure. I ditto everything that Carl just said. I'll add a slightly different spin to this question, which is a really good one. And that is, I think a lot of the genesis of what we're seeing with younger folks in terms of financial management and debt is driven by a really big economic factor. And that is that wage growth for younger people is really slow. It's really low and slow. As compared to, I hate to use myself as an example again, when I was growing up, wage growth was really strong, right, in the 70s and the 80s. But wage growth is really slow right now. And so when you're in markets where, in labor markets, going out there trying to find jobs, trying to find advancement, getting up the ladder, leveraging yourself from job to job, and it's just a really slow road. We're not talking about a lot of wealth accumulation, and I'm sure Diane sees this and hears about it when she teaches her course. But to give back eventually means you have to accumulate wealth, and you have to make good decisions about how you're going to accumulate wealth and how you're going to disperse your wealth, right? How you're going to share it around. But a big problem is this very, very slow wage growth, the very high cost of living, and again, I'm going to return to the AI issue. Artificial intelligence is remaking our labor markets in many, many ways. And our educational system, I think this issue goes even more broadly to our educational system, is not well equipped right now to deal with this. We have this terrific educational policy expert at PPI. Her name's Rachel Canner, and she literally spearheaded the revamping of the Mississippi school system. Because we're seeing fall-offs in enrollments in four-year degree programs. But as I said earlier, the trades are booming. The trade schools, vocational schools, the two-year programs are booming. The high school certification programs say you can get a high school certificate in crypto. That's kind of booming. So what we have to think about, I think, policy-wise, is to provide different pathways for our young people to kind of beat that wage growth, that slow wage growth, wall that they face, so that they can leverage up and get their foot in these labor markets and begin to do well and to accumulate to the point where they're giving back eventually.
Yeah, excellent points. Yeah, Diana was just...
Can I just
go ahead,
add
please.
just one thing, because
Yeah.
I thought that was just great. And so I think that the problem with AI and also the cost of housing twofold, Diana just articulated the real problem with AI, and my students they're afraid now that they're not going to get jobs, or the jobs that they will get are going to very quickly be replaced by AI. Housing is now really, for most of them, they don't think it's affordable anymore. So if you take those two things combined, it leads into this, the prediction market and sports betting, where they feel like they have to take, or crypto, much greater risk than maybe 10 years ago, because they're worried, hey, well, how else am I going to make money? Like, how am I going to be rich enough so one day I can donate? So.
No, that's great. I was just going to say, is there a conversation around philanthropy or kind of humanity in the classroom?
I'd say my students are very kind and generous and wonderful people, really. They donate their time all the time to activities across campus. They would make you proud.
Nice.
And they really, I wish I could reach out to some of their parents, not all, but most. And then I also teach for MBA students a class in advanced wealth management, and we learn giving strategies that are tax effective. So if they ultimately become wealthy, how can they help others and as many people as possible in the best and most tax-effective way, so they can reach more people?
Dennis, can I just add one
Yeah,
thing?
by all
And this
means.
hasn't popped up yet in this conversation. I'm sure it would have, but I'll just put it out there now. I don't think we can discount the massive impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our young folks. I'm an adjunct professor in the economics department. I teach one class a year in the fall, and I was just stunned. I can't even find the right words at the impact of the pandemic on my students back in 2020. especially students who are just coming into college, right? Where you were in that pipeline made a huge difference in terms of how you process the impact of the pandemic. If you were a freshman and you were spending your whole first year on Zoom, doing Zoom classes instead of out there, and half of college is social and emotional development. Half of it, the other half is education, right? It's how to learn how to be an adult and how to cope in society. The impacts were incredible. For the older kids, they had a little more flexibility and a little more resilience. And the stuff we saw, and it was hard on the faculty too, right? We had to deal with this and learn and react. But here's what I'll tell you. The resiliency with which those kids bounced back in 2021 and 2022 was remarkable. I don't know if you saw this in your class, Diane, but they went from being about as down and anxious and depressed and upset as you could ever see to becoming their 22-year-old charming selves, curious and outgoing, and it's just, it's a huge shout out to that generation and the ability to cope with that kind of upheaval.
It's encouraging to hear. I'm going to read a card, and this will be an interesting one to think about. I'm approximately $30,000 in debt due to student loans and living loans. I work 30 hours a week plus 20 hours on coursework. Me and my peers feel a sense of doom. I think a lot of attitude around money is survival, or we're going to die anyway. This is heavy, but this is a perspective that's probably not a unique perspective. Do you think high living study costs and the mentality around it poses a risk to financial economy, society, and even mental health? So this is somebody that's discouraged, and they're curious what the implications of this kind of debt, or the way money's managed. What are the implications from everything from financial markets to mental health? That's. No, I don't mean to drop.
No. I mean, it's
this is an important
no.
question.
I mean, I have huge empathy for that. I've been there. Actually, when I graduated in '93, it was a great economy, and the labor cycle was quite healthy. The Berlin Wall had fallen a few years earlier, and there was a peace dividend, and I got hired with no problem. But I was careless with credit, and back then you would just get things in the mail, paper mail, with big red type, past due. And that was a learning experience. I guess I would argue that debt, progress on debt is incremental. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It just has to be a little bit at a time. But that requires a lot of patience, and that's hard. Remind me the last part of the question.
Well, just the implications of this. Pardon me, Carl. The implications of this kind of environment on mental health.
It's I don't have a lot to add other than it's a game of inches at a time, progress, incremental progress, and this labor cycle is going to be interesting given the concerns around AI. We always have people on our air, and we're like, oh my gosh, is youth unemployment going to go to 30%? The way some CEOs, AI company CEOs, argue it will, and everyone always has this pat answer of like, the loom, the printing press, the electricity, the internet, the cloud, all of these enormous innovations over time, and all we've done is add jobs, add the number of aggregate jobs in society. And now that's encouraging, then a skeptic will come back and say, well, if AI is truly a replacement for cognitive thought, then it isn't like any of those things. It's a completely different kind of innovation. I still think there's a healthy cohort of people on the street, at least, who don't believe this is going to turn the world upside down. That AI will helpful, it'll be helpful to people at work, but it won't, and jobs will change. And there might even be a vacuum, a short-term vacuum where you lose jobs, but you will make them back up, and there'll be this sort of air pocket. It'll feel really bad, but that eventually employment will catch back up and you'll have a different kind of job where instead of managing, 20 workers, you'll manage 20 AI agents, and they'll all be operating, and it'll be your job as a custodian to manage these AI agents, and then you'll turn around to your boss and explain how you got your work done. So I don't think the gloom is universal.
Yeah, that's encouraging to hear. I do want to just, one last part of this. How can institutions systemically change to support young people who have given up? Now, I think for us that might look like how do we, we've talked about the regulatory environment. How do we meter some of these behaviors? What can we do to, Gen Z is a bright generation, and they have their sensitivities. How can we support them? How can companies support them?
I just want to take the question in a slightly different
Yeah,
way.
wow.
What can you do, right? You can be empowered. Let me tell you, I grew up in a family where athletics meant reading a book. Like, I knew nothing, couldn't do anything. And now I biked a few years ago. I did a ride called RAGBRAI, which is above 500 miles across the state of Iowa in a week. And let me just tell you, when my friend first proposed this idea, I thought, you've got to be crazy. It seemed insurmountable, like debt is. And I have students, if you have $30,000 of debt, I know that's hard. I can imagine the pressure you feel. Most marriages, the number one reason why they break apart is fights over money. It just is something that we bear with us all the time, and it's very stressful. So just recognize that, and you are in a large group. You have a lot of people who are like you, even if you feel alone. And you can empower yourself slowly but surely, like Carl said, inch by inch. So what I would do is I'd really take learning financial literacy seriously. Read some of the books I recommended. Take my class, or there are plenty of other classes where you can learn yourself. How can I save at a minimum 20% of my after-tax income? More is better. And then saving first is paying off your debt. The faster you can pay that off, you can have your money learn to work for you or with you instead of against you. When I'm a debtor, the interest rate is working against me. If I invest, then the compounding works for me. And really, I've had students with more than $200,000 worth of debt take my class, and slowly but surely, my favorite emails come from them later saying, you know what, I frickin' did it. And you can do it with education and slowly but surely. Is it going to be easy? No. But all of us, like, I achieved financial independence very early in my career simply because I hated my job. I didn't even know what FIRE was. And I just, off of very little income, was able to slowly save and invest. So your first step is saving. First step is education, second step is saving and slowly paying down that debt. And then you'll be able to have really great tools and techniques and habits that will help you build your wealth independently. But you can do it. Don't be sad or depressed. Empower yourself. It's achievable. The institutions, I think I wish more of them, including CU, sponsored more financial education, really high school onward.
Thank you, Diane. Diana?
This is terrific. I would second the notion that a lot of this responsibility comes from within, as opposed to what can others do, what can institutions do for me or do collectively to ease the burden and the pain of the problem we're talking about here. I think a lot of it does come from within. And I'll make myself unpopular, but ditch the social media. There are other ways to interact with society, with friends, with family, where you are not as subjected to the pressures to buy, to consume, to get, to have what you can't afford to have. I mean, my generation grew up without social media. We turned out okay. We did great. The boomers are some of the most productive members of generations in society in the history of the country. I would say that, and that's a personal choice, whether and how much time people spend on social media. But the other thing is, and this is related, but this is going to sound very different. We're living, and this goes to Carl's expertise, but we're living in a zone right now where AI dominates the news, right? And there's a lot of fear out there about whether AI is going to completely displace me as a worker. And I'm not going to have opportunities, and I don't know what to do because I fear losing my job to AI. I think the way to beat that one is to get educated about AI. I think, Carl may disagree, I think there's a huge AI bubble out there right now. There's just billions and cajillions of dollars in investment chasing relatively low levels of income. The AI sector is just getting itself together and shaking out into what it's going to look like, moving forward. That doesn't mean the world's coming to an end and that AI is going to take over everything. And 100% second what Carl said. In fact, you should record what you said about how technological advancements create opportunities for growth and expansion. And even though there might be displacement, it will create new and different opportunities moving forward. I think people need, instead of being sort of doomsday about the whole thing, they need to sort of educate themselves about where things are going on both fronts.
That's great. Thank you for that. Along that theme of education, what are online tools that you recommend for debt management? And I don't know if you have some by name, that would be great.
I really don't, because I think the debt consolidation services, everybody's out to separate you from your money. And I really, and there are lots of financial games you could play. Some people, get these zero interest rate credit cards and take their debt and move it from one credit card to another. There are all kinds of strategies. I guess let me start with, if you have debt, what I have my students do is make a spreadsheet of every kind of debt I have, right? Or they have. And so you list the institution, and then you should list the size of the debt. $30,000 of student debt, $5,000 of credit card debt, and so forth. And then next to that, I would have a list of the interest rate that you're paying. Most of my students don't even know what interest rate they're actually earning on their bank accounts, nor do they know the interest rate that they're paying on their credit cards. Let me just say, if you don't know the interest rate that you're paying on the credit card, it's probably not a low one. These banks are not on your side. And so I would start slowly. How do I not pay off the smallest loan, although some people do that. I think it's better to pay off the highest interest rate first, because you're making the most money by doing that. If I pay off a credit card that has an 18% interest rate, I am earning 18% more by not paying someone else. That's an awesome investment. And so that's how I'd really do it. I don't really have a lot of suggestions. Maybe you know of anyone else of a great website that would help you do that. I'll say Dave Ramsey,
Yeah.
He's a little controversial, honestly. I tell my students, buyer beware, sorry, but he has some good ideas. Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater is what I say to them. But his website is full of information that will help him get paid and not necessarily you. But he does have some information on it, both his podcast, his website, that will help you understand how to pay off debt. His philosophy is more pay off the smallest amount of debt. Like if I have $500 at 5% and I have $3,000 on a different credit card that's at 18%, he recommends paying off the $500 first, because he said, wow, I can pat myself on the back. I feel better. I got some kind of, I got rid of some of my debt. Maybe that makes you feel better, and it should. I think you should feel a lot better paying off your 18% loan first. Obviously, make all of your debt payments. Do not be late. Set them all up for auto pay. And then slowly but surely, you can really do it.
No, that's great. And I would share, I think Carl mentioned it, incremental wins. A credit score is a snapshot in time. So what our credit score is in April of 2026 will be different in July of 2026. So every incremental positive move you make yields almost immediately. I will just share at Elevations we have a product called Green Path, and it's an educational product as well as a debt management product, and you can find that at elevationscu.com. Shifting gears just a little bit, a couple questions around home ownership. One of the questions is, how did we get to where we are today? Generations before us were able to enter into home ownership. Today, not so much. And would we encourage somebody to invest versus buy a home? So kind of the idea of entering into the housing market and what that might look like.
Well, I mean, we've underbuilt homes for years, and that's, just catching up with us now. Immigration is another element of that conversation, which is more controversial. But building homes is very difficult from a permitting standpoint. Not all of it's federal, a lot of it's state and local. There's a real effort, obviously, to try to smooth that out. But I mean, the home building industry, even this year, was hoping for a good spring selling season, and that's kind of slipping away even as we speak because we can't manage to get mortgage rates below 6. I think a mortgage rate above 6 is punitive. It'd be difficult to argue, even with all the benefits of home ownership, until it gets into the 5s, I think is probably a tough sell. But I think there's enough political wins to make it happen. It's interesting. A lot of the policy solutions on all of this stuff are so clunky. I was thinking of the credit card cap, trying to cap credit card rates at 10%, which was one idea earlier in the year, which actually had a lot of political circularity. You had Elizabeth Warren and some Republicans both on board. But the banking industry is quick to say, oh, well, if you cap our credit card rates at 10, we're going to start pulling back credit for everybody. And I guess it's a fierce debate right now as to whether or not that would be hurtful to all of us if you were to set a firm cap above or at 10. We'll see.
Yeah, so I think there's there's sentiment that would suggest I can't get into a home. I can't get into, these seem unsurmountable. Diane.
I didn't own a home until I was in my 40s, right? And I could have afforded one earlier. It's a lifestyle decision for most of us. For some of us who bought homes in Boulder long ago, we were really lucky with our timing and that the price has really appreciated. But for most of us, I try to teach my students, hey, you know what, I can live, and we did, my husband and I, my 2 children, lived a terrific quality of life just renting. I will say with all the home repairs we've had lately, really wish I was a renter. And so I don't really think this is a binary thing. Maybe you can't buy a house right out of college. Maybe that's a good thing because homes take time and usually they're actually not a really terrific investment. When people think their homes are a great investment, it's because they're only thinking about the price appreciation. They're also ignoring the fact that it was a leveraged investment. They put money down, they borrowed the rest of it. If you took that same money in most areas of the country and invested it in the stock market, you probably would have been better off. It's a wonderful thing. I'm really glad that I own my house because it is a home and it represents a lot of things to me. But I really don't think it's the be-all or end-all. There was a reporter long ago from the Wall Street Journal. He recently passed away, and his name is Jonathan Clemens. For anyone who wants to buy a house, I recommend you look up an article he wrote in the Wall Street Journal probably 10 or 15 years ago. Something about the total cost of home ownership. So if you just search would be Jonathan Clemens home ownership. There's another one by J.L. Collins, and he wrote something like, why your home is a terrible investment. That doesn't mean you didn't get pleasure from it, but I actually don't think you gotta get hung up that it's the best investment ever. It's a lifestyle decision, not necessarily an investing decision.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I think about the Front Range of Colorado, and demand outstrips supply significantly, and also our appreciation rates are probably not representative of the broader marketplace. Shifting gears a little bit, back to financial literacy and financial wellness. Who's responsible for that? Is the schools responsible? Is the family responsible? And when should that start?
I'm going to build off of Diana's point, which I loved. I really think it's us as individuals. Yeah, it would be terrific. Schools are really trying to teach students in high school, but if you look at the studies, they show that when they teach financial literacy from elementary school through middle school through high school, most students really don't understand it, nor are they, I mean, they may understand the concepts, but it doesn't mean much to them. I think it's really senior year. They're most, in my classes, it's mostly filled of juniors and seniors. Suddenly, they're realizing they need to know adulting skills. And so they start to think, what do I need to do? Like, what am I supposed to do with this money? How much rent can I afford? What should I be spending on going out with my friends? So I'd put it on the individual first. I think parents can really help. I do think it's a problem. I struggle with it myself. How do I help make my classes so engaging that students want to learn and want to actually implement? Because just learning the material means nothing. I have to have them actually implement after my class is over. So I'd say mostly individuals. I'm going to put it on us first and our parents, and then later, as Diana and Carl both said, the institutions behind them.
Yeah, very good. Anyone else on that matter?
I mean, I do think it's interesting that you think about all the life skills you do learn in school, right? I mean, they used to teach home economics when I was younger, but even if that's gone, you still learn a lot about human health in school, and yet we somehow have this huge air pocket of education that ignores one of the seminal skills you're going to need to live. I mean, it's a very, very odd omission, I think, in education.
I would just add that I think it comes from the family. I think it's part of the value system that you learn in your family. We were taught from the get-go, there were two things we were taught, at least on the financial front. One is get to work as fast as you can. I was a donut girl at Dunkin' Donuts when I was 14 years old. I lied about my age on the application. But I came from a very lower middle class family, and we had to work. There was no money to hand out. No extra money at the end of the month. So get a job, always have a job, and start contributing to supporting yourself. I think, frankly, in the last couple of generations, that ethic or that value has waned away. I did a lot of babysitting in my 20s and 30s. My kids were babysitters. They're all now in their 30s. And, you can sort of trace out trends over time. The second thing we were told is don't ever be in debt. It was really the cardinal sin. It was, but again, we were helped by the fact that we had lots of opportunities for upward mobility and wage advancement, and the cost of living was really low. But that was just the law in the family I grew up in. No debt. And to this very day, and I've passed this on to all of my kids, nobody is in debt, because debt will change your life in so many ways. Financially, emotionally, physically, it's an incredibly corrosive and toxic force in a person's life, because it constrains what you can do and what your freedoms are. And so I do think a lot of this starts with the family.
Did your family delineate between mortgages and other kinds of debt?
Yeah, so qualifier, yes. It was okay to have a mortgage. Wasn't okay to have like a jumbo mortgage and be, where you put down 10%. I think it was back then you could put down 10% on a house. That was not okay, but it was okay to have a mortgage. Mortgage, and to what Diane was saying, that's how you build equity in an asset. So yeah, that was the one qualifier. No automobile loans. You either could afford a car or you took the bus.
And automobiles are, I think, the most financed good, right? Like 90% of cars are financed in part, yes?
Yep.
So can I just add one other thing?
By all means.
I think from an institutional perspective, one thing I actually wish is that there was more practical knowledge that was taught. I feel like most of the classes, for example, in the finance department, it's almost all theoretical. Almost all my students complain that they don't really know. My daughter, for example, she is a consultant now. She had no idea what she was doing when she was first starting. My son works on Wall Street, same thing. So I actually think from an institutional perspective, I wish some of the classes were a bit like they don't have home economics or really life skills. I would love to teach a class on life skills at CU. My students desperately need it.
That's great. Great comments, panel. So there's a fear amongst young people that their investments could be wiped out by cybercrime or cyber warfare or AI or is the FDIC going to, are the government insurers going to stay liquid? How do we respond to, I mean, there's such crazy stuff happening. They see, how can we kind of ease those tensions?
I mean, I guess I would only say you almost feel bad for regulators, almost, because
An interesting
things are
comment.
moving so fast. We did a panel yesterday on the business of sports, and we were talking about how DraftKings and online betting sites and daily fantasy had changed, and then as soon as they came along, they were displaced by prediction markets, which is the definition of the Wild West when it comes to financial regulation. No one knows. There's debates about what kind of gambling they are, but who's really monitoring? If you and I had a bet on a prediction, who's going to help us settle or decide whether or not I had inside information? The speed with which, I mean, it's always been this way, but especially now, the pace of technology versus legislators' ability to regulate it's sad.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. You think about the Genius Act at the federal level. The Colorado State Legislature is trying to get its arms around AI. They passed a bill in 2024. It was stayed last year. Now they're going to reinvent it. The pace is dramatic, and it really makes for it can be a real adverse environment for sure. Here's one, Carl. This student would suggest that television or CNBC viewership is down. I can't speak to that. How can this group be encouraged to leave their YouTube finance channel, TikTok, and other streaming services? TV is no longer their source of information. I think that's just in concept. They're obviously getting their information elsewhere. Where is the optimal point of objective information?
Well, our ratings aren't down. What's down is sort of cable's as a medium. Cable television's share of media is been shaved as people cut the cord, but you'll find CNBC content on TikTok. You'll see CNBC content on YouTube and everywhere else as all media tries to navigate shifting distribution pipes. I do think, in general, there's been a huge renaissance of financial media everywhere, whether it's us, Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal. There's an amazing podcast of these two dudes in Silicon Valley called TBPN. It's just two dudes, and all they do is bring on heavy hitters from tech. Mark Zuckerberg was on the other day.
Wow.
All of that's for the good. I don't have a problem. It used to, we forget, like in the 90s, if Morgan Stanley downgraded Nike stock and Nike traded down that day, you and I would have no idea why.
Yeah.
I mean, it was literally, that information was saved for clients of Morgan Stanley. And cable news came along and financial media managed to democratize enough information where we now know, you and I know why Nike trades down if it's a downgrade. And we certainly cover that. But I think that helps. And now, it's obviously a torrent of information and people need to learn how to process it, but it's certainly better than it used to be.
Yeah, you can certainly get as granular as you'd like. Diana, okay. This is a great stack of questions, and 3/4 of them were from our students. So we're very grateful that you're interactive and you're willing to ask the hard questions. We're going to close. So I just wanted to give each of you an opportunity to kind of summarize a thought or give us kind of a nugget on the environment that we face. You can, whoever wants to go first.
I mean, I always love ending these panels on optimistic notes, and every generation has its own crucible. Every generation has a different labor market to graduate into. Every generation has a different wave of tech innovation to handle. We generally figure it out over time. We do live, and Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan loves to say that we are lucky enough to live in probably the most dynamic economy the planet's ever seen. Warren Buffett is famous for saying if you were born in the United States in the modern age, you basically won the genetic lottery. We're lucky to be here. And as I said yesterday on a panel, our policy disputes tend to be really raucous and impolite and increasingly coarse. But we do have those discussions. We do manage to talk it out, and generally we settle on policies that help us better the economy and therefore society. So I warn anyone from being too much of a doomsdayer. It generally doesn't work that way.
Thank you, Carl. Diana?
Also on a positive note, look, I teach Gen Z, and I soon will be seeing the Gen Alphas, assuming I continue to teach. These are incredible generations. They are full of smart, motivated young people who are facing some obstacles, but they can do it. And what I won't say is we've all got your back, because like any other generation, a lot of the help has to come from within. Wow. And get involved, right? Get angry about some of the obstacles that you're facing. How can you make change? How can you be part of the process for change, for getting some oversight of these markets, for sorting out your financial planning, your personal planning, for figuring out how to best navigate through a career path in labor markets. And you know, if all those things come together, I think this generation is going to come out on top. Remember, you guys, the Gen Zers are going to be in the political process, in charge of our political system here, and not too much longer. And we've skipped over generations of, Gen X and millennials, because there are people in political power who wouldn't give it up, you know? Look at Mitch McConnell, look at Chuck Schumer, look at Nancy Pelosi. I mean, they're in there for hundreds of years. They wouldn't give it up to the next generation, and so we skipped over 2 generations of political leadership. We don't want that to happen with the Gen Zs. So the Gen Zs have to prove themselves, get on top of it, so that they can take over political leadership of this country at some point.
The term limits session is at 4:30. No. Diane, close us out.
Wow, it's hard to follow both of them with such great answers. I also want to say that I'm optimistic. I know that students feel this is a really hard time, but let me just say I just finished, a book about 1929. Only 10% of investors actually invested in the stock market, and now 63% of most households invest somewhere. They're like, with the advent of a lot of these tools and technologies, it has removed friction. It used to be like you had to go into a brokerage firm to open up an account, or you had to do it online, and it was a slow, much slower process. To go to gamble, you used to, go to the racetrack, go to Las Vegas. And so, although these lines have blurred, in some ways it's helped us because costs are much lower. Access to information, as Carl was saying, is much better. And so some of these things have really helped you. You're all much more interested in investing. I didn't even know about investing. I mean, I knew the concept of it. I didn't start to invest until my early 20s, so you're way ahead of me. I just wanted to give you some advice. What would I tell my own kids? Don't confuse gambling with investing, right? If you really want to play some of these prediction markets or sports betting, I might consider allocating 90% of my money to what's tried and true. Investing in, I don't know, index funds, maybe low-cost target date funds. That's a great strategy. You don't have to know a lot about it. It has a very long track record of working. The other 10%, go have fun, right? Try whatever you're trying to do with cryptocurrency and so forth. And in that 10% bucket, hold yourself accountable. I would measure my performance each year for a few years. Prove to yourself that you are beating the indexes, like an S&P 500, whatever index you want to use. And if you're doing that, great. Allocate more of your portfolio. So I used to manage, as I said to you, money for the seriously wealthy, people who had 10 million north of $100 million. And I had them do the same thing because they always thought they had really great ideas. And let me just say, so we isolated this speculation account, 10% of their money, 90% was in tried and true. I didn't have a single client ever keep that speculation account. If it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. And then I would take educating yourself really seriously. That is power. Information is power. And thirdly, truly avoid the buy now, pay later increasing debt, because it will really cause you a lot of financial stress and mental stress.
Diane, thank you so much. All sage advice. What a great panel. Thank you all for being here, participating. Thank you to our attendees. The 78th Annual CWA is alive and well, and we're very grateful for everyone. Thank you so much.